Greetings, my brothers and sisters, sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. In the current age of popularity surrounding psychedelics, it is imperative that we have individuals out in the field who are not only experienced with these medicines, but that can also help integrate these experiences after individuals come back down to earth and require grounding and context to be provided to how their experience can be most useful for their day-to-day lives. Today's guest on the show is a woman who fits this description to a T, and is someone who is not only passionate about helping these medicines get the respect they so rightfully deserve with regards to the integral role they play within the human experience, but is also passionate about being a guide for those individuals looking to experience these medicines and have a container to discuss their experiences and receive support. She does this in her work hosting her Sacred Integration Tribe. And in addition, she is also the host of the Modern Hippie Podcast, is a 5D healer, and if all of that wasn't enough, she also utilizes modalities beyond simply psychedelic medicines that include breathwork, sound healing, meditation, mindset coaching, energy healing, and more to help her clients achieve an optimum state of well-being in their lives. So please, help me in welcoming Barrett Perlman to the show. Barrett, such a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. That was the most beautiful introduction, and I thank you.
You're so welcome. And we were just chatting, for everyone listening, we were chatting before we hit record because there was so many synchronicities around us meeting. When I first heard about Barrett, and I say this in the outro, but I'm gonna dive into it now, so I'll ruin the surprise for you guys. So I have a friend, Leah Drew, mutual friend of ours, who's also been on this podcast. I think she was one of in the first 10 episodes. But
mine too.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. And she was back from, I think she was living in Utah at that point, but she just moved to Boulder. It was like a couple weeks ago. So anyway, she was back and she was sharing about her friend who's a psychonaut. She's like, oh, you would love this woman. She's amazing. She's doing incredible work, things like that. And so I was like, oh, it's amazing. And then I start talking about how I want to go down to Peru to this place called Blue Morpho to do ayahuasca with this guy, Hamilton Souther. And she's like, wait a minute. My friend Barrett, I was just telling you about, is literally with him right now. And then she shows me a picture. And so like, guys, this is like the signs I receive where I'm like, okay, this is meant to happen. And so Barrett, it's amazing to have you here. The fact that we've had so many synchronicities already just tells me this is going to be an incredible show and also a credible relationship that we get to, cultivate here. And I'm so excited for the opportunity to get to meet you in person one day. But where I'd really love to start this epic dialogue that we're about to traverse on is how you first got introduced to psychedelics. What did this look like for Barrett when you were moving through your life? Did you immediately love them when you found them? Did it take a little bit of time? Were you part of the Just Say No Nancy Reagan crowd like I was when I was a kid, only to become a full-on psychonaut later on? Tell me everything.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So we can really walk that path. I mean, up until I was about 15 years old, I was part of Just Say No, but I had my heart really set on being a famous actress one day. And I didn't want to have something in my past that would like rat me out or I'd get in trouble for. So I stayed away from it until I knew I didn't want to do that anymore. And then I became a professional. Well, I started wakeboarding. And so it very much fit in with the action sports community to start smoking weed. And I think when I was 18, I took psilocybin mushrooms for the first time. And I was with these friends in Tennessee and I loved it. So we took like a full dose, I probably ate like a whole eighth to myself. And they put on The Wizard of Oz with the Dark Side of the Moon soundtrack. And they were very cautious. Like you can't eat before, like they knew what was up. And I just kept finding myself wanting to go and sit in this back bedroom by myself and close my eyes. And I was watching the visuals and I was having the most transformative experience. And they kept running and grabbing me and pulling me out and being like, you're going to have a bad trip. And I was like, I promise you what is happening is so far from bad that like, that's impossible. And they were like, no, you can't be alone. And I was like, are you sure? Because I'm watching music turn into color and objects in my head. And I've never seen this before. And this is fucking grand. And I loved that experience so much. And I think I had dabbled like one or two more times in college with it, but never got to the point of having visuals again. And so it wasn't until I was, 2016. So it wasn't until I was about 30 years old then that I got into mushrooms again. And I found myself at a place in my life where I was really depressed. I was just coming out of a breakup, and I had really been led to believe some things about myself that I no longer believe are true, but were just heartbreaking to me. And I didn't believe that I was lovable, and I was ready to kill myself. But I happened to have these mushrooms on hand, and I thought, well, my drug dealer said, look yourself in the mirror, it'll change your life on mushrooms. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll try these mushrooms and I'll see if anything changes. And in the meantime, like actually wrote my best friend with my mom's number, the passwords to all my shit, so she could like notify the world when I was dead the next day. And I took these mushrooms and I decided I would try to see auras. I was reading a book about auras, and it also involved looking in the mirror. And I got in the mirror and I'm looking myself in the eyes, and I'm relaxing my eyes to see the aura around you. And I realized I started to see my eyes merge and like become one here. And I start looking at it and I start getting all these visions down the side. And if I looked at them, they went away. But if I held that tunnel vision, all this knowledge started downloading. And all of a sudden there was another consciousness there with me. And it basically sort of was like, you have to love yourself. And let's fill you with love. Let's heal you. And I was like, I don't know how to love myself. And so I said, okay, new deal. My dog was there with me, who's also, if you can see him behind me somewhere, he's back there. But this consciousness sat me down on the floor of the bathroom where my dog was. And it guided me to fill with the love I felt for my dog. And to the point that I was in tears, I felt so much love for my dog. And then immediately this consciousness dropped a mirror between what was coming out of my heart and the dog. And it immediately bounced back on me and I felt for the very first time in my life, love for myself from the inside out. And everything changed for me in that moment. Just on a dime, like I was bawling, I'd never felt anything like it. And I was on a high easily for the next 2 months. You couldn't bring me down from where I was at. And I went, holy shit, there's something to these mushrooms. What the fuck was that? And so I started getting mushrooms, and I was like, let me do that again. And very quickly learned you can never repeat the same journey twice. You can never do the same thing twice. And I started taking them in my bedroom by myself and having these incredible experiences that were reframing my life, that were bringing so much healing to shame that I felt, to attachment to judgments I had on myself, on others. I really struggled with alcohol a lot growing up. It was like I loved to drink till I was blackout drunk. And you never knew what kind of Barrett was going to emerge, if it was going to be a violent Barrett, if it was going to be like a super promiscuous Barrett, if it was just going to be super fun Barrett. And she got in a lot of trouble, and I got in a lot of like really bad situations because of it, and hurt a lot of people close to me because of it. And as I started to navigate then with mushrooms, I started to heal from all of that sadness that I was carrying and that pain. And I started to reframe people who'd hurt me, and understand the lessons there. And my whole life changed. And anyone who knew me then and knows me now, especially the few people that were very close to me, are like, you're a completely different person in the best of ways. And many of them are like, it gives me hope for some other people I know in my life that I would love to see that level of healing for. And so, yeah, I stumbled along for years being like, something's going on with these mushrooms. And I mean, even sometimes I would take them and have what felt akin to like an ayahuasca journey, which, where I blasted off into outer space. These beings took me to this place of light, written in all these different codes in the cosmos. And at the time I didn't understand what it was. I was like, what is this? What do these symbols mean? What's going on? And they're like, well, you're ready now. We're going to unlock you to receive more of your true power. And that's kind of been an ongoing theme my whole life. Like I had a past life where I fucked up having a lot of power. And this life, there've been a lot of people watching me and containing that flow, a lot of, guardians of mine essentially, and containing that flow. And so there've been lots of different points where they've unlocked it. And that was one of them. But yeah, so mushrooms were just, a newer part of my life in the last several years. And then I started to see it come out in the news maybe 2 or 3 years later. And I would try to tell my friends like, hey guys, like you should be taking mushrooms at home by yourself. And they were like, you're going to have a bad trip. Are you crazy? And I was like, no. I was like, and even if you cry the whole time, the amount of better that I feel the next day after having cried all night before on mushrooms, exponentially worth it. And, yeah, so I feel like I really sort of navigated the therapeutic effects of it by myself, stumbling along. And it just was beautiful. It saved my life. It changed everything. And then I got introduced to ketamine in 2020. And I feel like ketamine really saved my life in 2020. And I was almost like pissed when I found ketamine. I was like, how am I X years old and no one's ever offered me ketamine before? How did I get this far? It's so good. And so, yeah, K-holes. Once I started going into K-holes, I was like, what the fuck is going on here? This isn't just a drug. This is literally, if you look at what's happening, it's completely separating your consciousness from your body. And so what does that mean? And how then can it be interpreted where we're going and what we're doing if your consciousness has been completely separated from your body? And so from there, I've stumbled into combining ketamine with mushrooms is my favorite. I've combined it with cannabis. I've even thrown a little DMT in before for it just, yeah. So I'm experimenting, and then ayahuasca fell in there somewhere as well. I did the LA knockoff version for my first time, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, which was in a dance studio with a guy who wasn't a shaman, but knew how to make the brew and had held space for a few ceremonies. So he thought he was qualified and wasn't, in hindsight. He's so far from Hamilton. It's ridiculous. And now I'm, just this past year, got into my third ceremonies all the way through. I think I'm on like 12 now. Or 12 or 13 ayahuasca ceremonies in my life. And I did bufo last year for the first time, 5-MeO-DMT. And so I've done large doses of bufo and experienced that. And now with my facilitator, we're experimenting more with smaller doses. And I'm really enjoying those, but having a wide array of experiences. And I'm happy to go into all of them. For me, my path is to share the plant medicine experience with the world. And I was shown that on an ayahuasca journey in Peru, where the psilocybin came to me and said, it is your path to share this. And as long as you do and surrender to that path, we will catch you and everything will be okay. And so for me, in order to share that and to share in people's integration, I feel like I need to have been those places myself, or I can better support them if I have been those places myself. And I seem to be really fucking resilient. So it kind of works out to play and explore.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. Oh, that's so amazing, and it's funny how I found that for whatever we're meant to do in life, it's kind of like when we realize or have that awareness, oh, this is really what I'm meant to do. It's almost like, oh, I was built for this. Thank goodness this is what I'm meant to do because I'm built for this, and And again, like, it's one of those things where like, especially because you have respected the medicine, and understand what the medicine is. Like, I think for a lot of people, like talking about bad trips, right? Like, I think more trips have been deemed bad because they've actually been powerful than before people actually understood what these medicines could do. Like, I remember when I was younger, I got into psychedelics when I was 23, cannabis, when I was 16, but I was, my anxiety, told me that like, hey, anything else, I still bought into a lot of the other, dare propaganda and whatnot. So the first time I ever tried anything else was MDMA. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I could go to a funeral and have a blast on this. Like, what is anyone talking about? Like, because I woke up the next day, because like, I was a raver for years. And so I would drink, and I was never like a big drinker. It never like, I would watch my friends get blackout and enjoy it. And I would just be like, I get 4 drinks in, I get a headache, I get like indigestion. I'm like, how do you guys get to that level? So that was me just like in clubs, like drinking beers, but not really liking it, being like, what is this? And then I find MDMA and I'm like, oh man, this is way better. And I wake up feeling incredible the day after, so long as I like, don't do anything too crazy. And so it was interesting because when I found psilocybin, I was 23, so I wasn't like super young, but I remember this whole talk about like the bad trip, right? And what I've realized is that the trips that I can look back on and be like, wow, that one in particular, like completely revolutionized, are the ones that at that early age, I would have deemed like a quote unquote bad trip, and my friend actually, who I used to trip with quite often, we were neighbors growing up. And so like, he was like, yeah, man, that's, again, psilocybin's how it works. Sometimes it's like the best, funniest ride of your life. Other times it's therapy. And I was like, yeah, 100%. And I think it's so beautiful because like you were saying, so when my father got sick, this was in 2014. So it was like, there was mention of this stuff coming out, like, psilocybin therapeutic doses, things like that. But again, it was a much different world back then, as I know you're aware of. And so like when he got diagnosed with cancer, I was still living at the same house with him. And so I was watching him like deteriorate day after day. And so, I was doing a lot of psilocybin back then, pretty much like multiple times per week, I would be hitting the button to go and like get closure and like experience like how to move through grief and things like that. And I really credit them because by the time he passed, of course it was sad. Of course, like, I didn't want my father to pass away, but I feel like a lot of that processing had been done because I had truly felt as though I had reached the other side, whatever that is and whatever people deem that to be. I had gone like completely home. Of course, when I did 5-MeO, I was like, well, maybe I wasn't completely back that time. But again, like it felt as though like I got some closure in knowing where he's going, knowing that he's going to be okay. Like I had the experience of being infinite, not just like knowing it. I actually had the experience of it. And so I'm so glad you bring that up. And, it's funny mentioning ketamine. I only recently found ketamine. I actually have never really had like a true experience with ketamine. I've done microdosing with it. I've been at music festivals for years with people offering me bumps off spoons, and I just never knew what to expect. So I was like, no, I'm going to wait until like, I find the right people to do it with. And it was actually when I podcasted with Aubrey, he was like, hey, dude, have you ever tried mixing ketamine and cannabis? And I was like, I got you one better. I've never even tried ketamine. And he was like, huh? Like, he was like, how do you not know about this? So I ended up finding some and trying it, and it's incredible. I mean, like, again, I haven't, like I was telling you before I hit record, like I've been almost like holding off, getting some foundational things down in the business and whatnot. And now I'm getting ready to like enter a period again where I want to go explore because it's one of my favorite things in the world, to be completely honest.
Mine
but,
too.
I haven't, it's so much fun, and again, it can be so challenging and all the things, but I love all of it, because like you were saying, the best experience I've ever had in psilocybin is where I fully cracked through and sobbed for like 3 hours. And it was the best. And me and crying have an interesting relationship. My girlfriend would say it's probably the fact that I'm a mental projector in human design, and I have like all open centers down here. So only my throat, my third eye, and my crown are defined. So just emotions and I, like, we have an interesting relationship. Like I feel them, but not super heavy. My thought patterns are way bigger. So that was like a cathartic cry that I hadn't had in literally over 10 years. And even when my father passed or anything. So it's amazing that you bring that up. I mean, this stuff is just, it's amazing what it can do.
It really is. I remember the first time I did ketamine. So kind of like you, I was out and about and I was in Tulum for my first time. And, these people I was with were
wild place.
Yeah. Were like do you want to try some ketamine? And I was like, well, what's it like? They're like, just makes you feel good. And I was like, sure. And they gave me like a microdose. They gave me a little bit and it made me feel good. I was like, oh, this is just like ecstasy. But I give fewer shits. Like, I'm not like so in love. I'm just like equalized. And I was like, cool. Yeah. So the next day, this man I've dubbed the king of the kingdom because he was the one who brought all the ketamine. He was like, do you want to do some ketamine? And I was like, yeah, that's no thing. And so we're at this club that has these day beds up top. And so we get in them and he gives me like a full K-hole sized bump. And I'm like, cool. And so we're sitting there and I'm like, oh shit. And like, at that point I had already had my first heroic doses of mushrooms. I felt like a very adept in the psychedelic space. And I started to realize, I was like, something's going on that's completely different here. And if I don't fully surrender to it, I'm going to have an awful time. And I remember being so scared because I didn't really know any of these people well. Like I had paid someone down there to basically be like my best friend. We're supposed to be on a retreat, but basically no one else signed up. So it was kind of like, I paid him to like watch out for me and curate some stuff. And so I was like, oh my God, like if they go downstairs, I'm never going to find them. It was this huge place. And I just happened to grab the one girl who was with us. And I was like, please don't leave me. And she's like, what'd you take? And I'm like, ketamine. She's like, oh, just give it 15 minutes. Like, you'll be fine. And I was like, just promise. She's like, okay, I won't leave you. I won't go downstairs without you, but lay back, just enjoy. And I was like, okay. And so I did. And I just remember having to just open my arms and trust fall into relaxing into this 4-dimensional experience. Like I'd never felt anything else that felt quite like being on a ride at Universal, where it's like you're the Jaws ride, like where you're like going through something and it'll like twist and turn and watch it as you like pan away. And you're just constantly always moving in that space, which I find so fascinating. And now fast forward, I've been rebuilding my relationship with ketamine because I was originally given a specific like electronic playlist to listen to, and it was very driving and it made the whole thing very much like being on a ride. And now I've started doing it to East Forest, to his music for mushrooms or his music for practitioners. And it's a just completely different container that is so much more soft and gentle and reflective. And it's something special. And then when you mix it with a plant medicine, it's like you take this phenomenal tool of becoming pure consciousness and then attach it to an intellectual consciousness, and you start to learn things. And so I did one in honor of Aubrey just last week. I was like, let me just do pure cannabis and ketamine. And as I was coming out of my K-hole, all of a sudden, so I'm a body worker as well. I do massage therapy and energy healing. And all of a sudden, like this 3D model of a body came to me. And I start getting instructed on all the different acupressure points of the body and the different systems that they correspond to and why they are where they are and why those systems run in these different places. And I was like, how I can't write this down. How am I supposed to remember all this? And they're like, you're not, you're just supposed to understand the grander concepts behind why. And then it walked me through doing like a lymph massage for the first time and the history of how lymph massage was discovered. And I was like, what the cool. Cannabis and ketamine.
That's so fun. Oh, that's amazing. It's so cool too, because I do find that, when you connect deeply to these spirits, whether it be like even the spirit of something like ketamine, right? Or even something, of course, like cannabis, I find that, yeah, sometimes they give you some hard love, right? Like sometimes, like I've definitely gone through my times where I'm like, all right, yeah, maybe I needed that. But when you get deep enough, like they always have a sense of humor to them, is what I found. They're just like really, really fun to hang out with. And I remember the first time that I had like a breakthrough psilocybin experience, it was what I mentioned to you before we hit record, where I had like done some 5 or 6 gram doses. I decided like, well, human math says that if I've done 6 and I've done 4, then like 6 plus 4, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? So I do it, and we were this is when I was younger, so we were like watching a show, and I'll tell everyone the name of the show because I highly recommend not watching it if you're not watching anything, because of course like sitting in darkness is so much better when you really break through, at least to me. But we used to watch this show named Decker.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a spinoff of Tim and Eric, if you ever heard of Tim and Eric on Adult Swim or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just ridiculous, weird humor. So anyway, I'm watching the show and I'm starting to laugh so hard that it doesn't even sound like laughter. It's just like air expelling through my mouth because it's just like, it's so funny that I can't even make sense of it. And then what happened was somehow in that like just insane, uncontrollable laughter, something got triggered that I was choking, I ate mold, and my throat was closing up. And that was like, and I knew it. It wasn't like a thought of like, did that happen? It was like a knowing where I didn't even have to, like, my consciousness, all of a sudden when my body started going through this reaction of like panic attack, holy shit, I'm like, what is happening? And then like I realized what somehow my body had just come to know in that moment. After I go into the bathroom and try to make myself puke and worry that I'm going to die, after about 5 minutes, I realized, oh, I'm not dying. So the second I realized that, it was like the biggest cosmic giggles. And they were like, now you can go lay in your bed and get some visuals, but we had to check you, And so it was like one of those experiences where the rest of that experience, we were just joking back and forth. I was like the kid who was like, whoa, and this too. And they were like, oh yeah, that too, like it was just that really funny symbiotic relationship. So I'm glad you brought up that like, comedic relief they have, because I do find that a lot of the time. Like, just sit back, hang out, you don't need to write any of this down. And you're like, but this is the most amazing stuff I've ever seen. Right. They're like, don't worry about it. You'll know it. And if you don't, well, you didn't really need to know it. And they're like, how are you guys telling me this?
Mm-hmm. So I went through this real big down in December, and I was hoping bufo would help, but I had accidentally taken an MAOI that week. And in response to my microdose hitting hard and some ketamine hitting, I Googled what it was I took and found out it was an MAOI. So my bufo facilitator properly wouldn't serve me because that people have been known to just drop dead on that. And so I was really depressed, and I really needed to connect. I felt I really needed to connect with consciousness. And so I took like 4 grams of mushrooms, and it didn't hit. And so then I've been experimenting with pharmawaska, which is taking an MAOI and then orally taking DMT. And so I did that, and it didn't hit. The dosage was off. And I was like, I don't really have time to take, I'm struggling. Let me take 4 grams of mushrooms. So I took 4 grams of mushrooms on top of it. And like 2 hours later, that still hasn't hit. And I'm like, fuck, like this is dumb. So I take a shower. I kind of get like a little something kicked in for like 5 minutes. And then that was it. And I was like, I'm just going to take some ketamine because, ketamine never fails me. And so I smoked a little weed with it too, because obviously cannabis and ketamine. I don't recommend this, by the way, for anyone listening. I super do not recommend this. But I ended up tapping into this really incredible space of getting some of the DMT through my ketamine, which is incredibly conscious. It's like my favorite combo as well. And again, there were things that like they're teaching you, and you're like, fuck, how am I supposed to remember all this? Like, let me just write it down. And they're like, no, you don't need to. It's okay. And you're like, no. Oh, this is where I was going with it. I was curious. I was asking it, how do I dose the DMT? Like, what's the proper dosage to get the pharmawaska right? And it kind of gave me like this, like a meter, where the amount would go up like on a dial. And so it was like, well, you just need to go over to the DMT, hold the DMT, and the DMT will tell you how much of it to take. And it's kind of like a little dial. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. In the medicine space, like, but you think it's going to tell me when I'm sober? And it was like, yeah, just try it. And I was like, okay, but then like, what if it's wrong? And it's like, well, then you're just going to have to try again, aren't you? And I was like, great.
Oh my God.
Thanks, DMT.
That's so funny. Oh my God. It's so comical because I've definitely had experiences like that too. Like where you take something, it doesn't work in the way you think it's going to work. And then also times where you take something that you expect to be a certain dose and then it's much higher. I've mentioned the story about me and the accidental 70 hits of acid plenty of times. Yes, I won't go through the story, but it's like I've been on both sides of that, expecting something to hit harder and it not. And then also on the other side, expecting like, oh, this is going to be like not a microdose, but like not a macro dose. And then it happens to be a macrodose, which I think is the story with everyone's LSD experience ever. It's never like I took acid and it was exactly what I expected. I've never once heard that. Like everyone's like either like I took acid and it didn't work, or I took acid and like the whole day was just a control alt delete, you know? And so like, it's why it's one of my favorite molecules to play around with, because what I found in that experience where I did take like between 60 and 70 hits was, I was like, wow, I can't still put it into words, but it was like this, obviously LSD is a crystal, but it just like, it felt like I went to this crystal universe, and I have no idea how to contextualize and articulate this, but it just showed me the power of what this molecule is. And it was one of those experiences where, again, you know, I was laughing with what I call the spirit of LSD. And it was essentially saying like, you know, yeah, you got to tread carefully when you're, you know, messing with me in a concentrated form, like psilocybin, you don't really have to worry about that. It's very rare that you're going to accidentally eat too many mushrooms because you know how many are on there, like, you know, but with things like LSD, you got to be really careful. And so, yeah, it's like, you know, just like you were saying, guys, I'm not recommending this by any means, right? We made the mistake, so you don't have to, but you know, it's interesting. You mentioned pharmawaska. I've heard it referenced as silawaska before too, and I've yet to try that. Do you combine it with cerium roux? Is that what you were combining it with, or something of that nature?
I was combining it with harmaline.
Gotcha.
But I also, what got recommended to me as like a biohacking nootropic was methylene blue, which is also an MAOI. So that was the thing I accidentally took. But then as I was Googling methylene blue and psilocybin, it was like people were like, absolutely, try the methylene blue and the DMT, use that instead of the harmaline. So I'm kind of experimenting with both now because the harmaline has some of its own effects. And that's kind of where the nausea comes from. And I haven't yet taken a breakthrough dose of pharmawaska, largely because I struggle to carve out the amount of time required to do it properly. But the methylene blue has been interesting. I think it's called silawaska though, when they do psilocybin with it, with the MAOI.
That would make a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, they combine psilocybin with cerium roux. And again, like, guys, from what I've understood, I haven't tried this, but it's like a little bit like, I was talking to Ian Morris about this. He was on the show telling me about his experience where he ate a very little amount of cerium roux and a pretty small amount of mushrooms. And he was like, dude, it was very strong. And I remember Kyle Kingsbury, when I was talking to him, he had an experience where I think he ate, I don't know, I'm going to throw out some numbers that are probably not accurate, but something along the lines of like between 0.5 and a gram, or maybe even less, of cerium roux and something like 3 or 4 grams of mushrooms. And he said it was equivalent to him feeling like he ate 100 grams of mushrooms. And he said he's eaten 30 grams of mushrooms on multiple occasions. And he was like, that was child's play compared to this. From that experience, like, you know, there's a lot of people that had that experience at the same time Kyle did, because I was at the get together where this happened. They were like, holy shit, dude, that was like the most aggressive thing I've ever experienced in my life. So I have yet to do it. I don't even know if I'd really want to go down that road unless I was with Hamilton.
I was going to say,
someone who could bring me back in.
My question to those people is like, would they do it again though? And if they would, then I want to try it.
Yeah, I think Kyle would for sure. I mean, Kyle is like, you know, he's one of the biggest psychonauts I've met. And I think the only thing that's really got to him, and I'm curious to hear your feedback if you've had this interaction or heard of this, but you know, 2 medicines that I've benefited from greatly on their own, but yet I've heard are really challenging to put together are combo and bufo. You know, I've heard that essentially frogs and toads just don't get along, apparently, right? Like, I've heard that if you do combo and then you do 5-MeO or bufo, you're like considered, it's still dangerous, but it's less dangerous. It's very dangerous if you do 5-MeO and then combo after, in terms of like actually like, not in terms of death per se, but more like, you know, schizophrenic and psychosis type things going on. That's what Kyle experienced. He mentioned that when he had done, I don't know if it was combo, bufo, and then combo again or something like that, he had, when he blasted off, right, when they gave him the pipe and he hit it and he blasted off, he got stuck in this loop that he felt like he was on for 1,000 years, where he just kept seeing himself hit the pipe and then go down, and then he'd see himself come back up and hit the pipe again. And he was just like literally in that loop for so long. And he kept, after he came out of the loop, he kept waking up in the middle of the night, getting stuck in the loop again and having these wild, like, you know, psychotic breaks and stuff. And so I've heard those 2 medicines don't go together. And so I repeat that in a lot of these episodes just because I know combo is getting quite a bit of publicity for great reasons. I mean, I've benefited fantastically from combo, but yeah, apparently including it into the bufo realm is just a no-go. So I didn't know if you had heard anything about that. But
I haven't. It doesn't surprise me. I feel like that may be a trait of bufo specifically. I haven't done cambo yet. But I have, on my last bufo experience, we ended up doing 4 rounds of 36 milligrams, which is a small dose for me. I started with 62 micrograms and then did 46, like, so 2 in one session. And then my second ceremony, I did 72 and then 30 something. And I had a full whiteout. So I was like, more doesn't seem to be better if I'm bringing nothing back. And so then we went into the 36, and I'm really enjoying playing with 36. And so we did, 4 of them. And as a facilitator, I enjoy all aspects of the medicine, even the hard stuff. And I feel incredibly resilient that even when I go through something that's terrifying, that's uncomfortable, I still come out of it laughing. And I'm laughing at how fucked up that was. It's not like I'm crying and I'm destroyed by it. I'm like, did you guys see that? Did you see what I went through? Yeah. Jesus Christ. Back. It's good to be back. And so the third dose that my facilitator gave me of that bufo was like, I think that was the one where I felt like I died. Like, I thought I vomited all over my face. And I like immediately opened my eyes and looked at my facilitator to see if he was panicked, and he wasn't panicked. So I was like, okay, I'll just keep going. And it was really, I felt like I died. In a way that a bufo had been really beautiful for me up until that point. And this was like a dark death. And so for me, it was powerful to learn that as a facilitator, because I had not seen that side of bufo. Like, I had been like, yo guys, skip to psilocybin, go straight for the bufo. It's phenomenal. And now that I've had that experience, I'm like, let's press the brakes on bufo. Psilocybin's a great introduction, for all of it, which is why I'm glad I work with it. And I think then, after I integrated with my facilitator for like 20 minutes, he was like, so I'd like to offer you a 4th one. And I was like, you do? I was like, yeah, I'll take it. Like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, I mean, you sure this is okay? Yeah. He's like, well, this is part of your training, right? And I was like, thank you for knowing that. And took a 4th one, and God, that one, I thought my eye exploded. I thought my whole face swelled up. It was, again, just another incredibly challenging experience. And, again, I came out of it and I was like, hey man, is my face swollen? And he's like getting real close. Like, it would be obviously like elephantitis swollen, and he's like, no, it's not. I was like, okay. I'm going to calm down. But so I bring this up to say I put a lot of bufo in my body. And I think that there's a certain amount of bufo you can put in that makes the bufo sit in your body longer. Like, on times when I did 36 once, and that was the end of our ceremony, I didn't get reactivations. And I love reactivations. They're my favorite part of doing bufo. Is like, I like to actually take mushrooms that night afterwards, because then it does a bufo reactivation for like 6, 7, 8 hours. Which I didn't do that night just because my ceremony had been so intense. But then when you sleep, you get these reactivations of the medicine. And that night when I slept, I died over and over and over and over. I was on a loop dying that death. And I was actually for me to get shook by something is a really big deal. And I was pretty shook the next day, and, called my facilitator to talk to him about it, and had, luckily, my circle is very adept at talking to me about these things. And I was like, I'm just going to take it extra easy today and honor that sucked. And then I was like, and I'm going to like put my pads on. I'm going to grab my weapons, and I'm going to go into Night's Dream ready to fucking do war with death.
Yes.
But then like a week after that, I was holding ceremony for a good friend of mine. And so it was a kind of a combined holding ceremony while also being deep in the medicine myself. And I took 5 grams of penis envy mushrooms, which are really strong. And not only did we run into a health hazard by accident, which we learned that the flume to the fireplace had been shut since we got there. And so we'd been running the gas fireplace. So my eyes had been stinging and I couldn't figure out why. And I ultimately went to the bathroom to wash my face because I was sure I'd been touching the floor, playing singing bowls and putting rocks in my eyes. So I went to go wash my face, and all of a sudden I had this massive bufo reactivation. And it was, again, like my eye was swelling, and my eyes actually were beginning to like swell. They were turning red. They were itching. And for maybe like a good 15 minutes, I'm in the mirror now identifying that this is bufo and this isn't the mushrooms. And this is a meltdown, like a very challenging meltdown. And a spirit guide that I'm familiar with actually showed up in the mirror and came and stood with me to kind of oversee and make sure that everything went okay. But it was a really challenging time for me. And eventually then there was a moment where the bufo disappeared and we went back to the intense DMT of 5 grams of penis envy, which is kind of what I think of. Penis envy is a real DMT heavy strain. So it's more like DMT and ayahuasca than it is like psilocybin.
That's wild. It's funny. Penis envy were the mushrooms that royally fucked me when I had that, dying experience on the 10 grams. That was penis envy.
I could see that.
And that was when I learned. That's when I learned, like, oh, not all strains are created equal, right? Because, there's this saying back in the day anyway, that when you go on like Blue Light or any of these websites, a cube is a cube is a cube, right? Like every cubensis is the same until you get into the pans or wood lovers or anything like that. Yeah, now when I go on there, they're like, except there is this one exception. Now, the funny thing was I recently had an experience with some psilocybin in a, not microdose, but like, around a gram or whatever. I haven't done a large dose of these yet because honestly, they seem even a little bit stronger than penis envy. And the thing with penis envy too is that for some reason, every time I eat them, they're dark as well. Like they're not just strong, they're also dark. And it's not that I don't like mind darkness, but it's just that like I don't go looking for it per se. Like if it comes up naturally, okay, cool. But this strain, I swear, they're called Infinity, and I think they're a cross of like Aztec God strain and something else. But Rachel and I have a tradition where we go to this beach every year. And we just eat mushrooms and we walk the beach and we just talk. Cool. And, we just literally for 10 hours, just walk back and down the beach, right? It's this nude beach on Martha's Vineyard. So it's like, it's eclectic. There's a lot of characters there. And part of the fun is like, people will always come and try to talk to us. I don't know if we have a billboard on us or something. So we're like talking to naked people while we're tripping. And it's like kind of one of those fun things where it's like, can we deal with this challenge, And so we do it this year. And I ate some of those Infinities, and it was just like one of those experiences where I realized real quickly that I was like not good at being in public. Not even like that I was feeling awkward, but like I was laughing so hard that they were like, my whole face looked like I had been cathartically crying. Rachel's parents were on the beach, and her dad had like they know what we do and everything. They were like, it's fine, whatever. But her dad had got this like spider bite or something, right? So he had an infection and had to go get antibiotics or something. So Rachel's mom's a huge beach nut. He likes the beach, but he's not there as much. But he decided to go today. And so he couldn't be in the sun because of this medication he was on or whatever, right? So when we're walking down the beach, we see them from afar, right? I see her mom, and I see like this white something next to her mom. And I'm like, what the hell is that, right? So I start walking closer. It's her dad wrapped up in a white bed sheet like a mummy, right? And he's on the beach, like just like hanging out. And he's like, her dad is hilarious. He's one of the coolest guys I've ever met, but he just doesn't see the hilarity in this, right? So I'm like trying not to like be rude and like laugh really hard, but this is like the funniest thing I've ever seen. So we finally break off from them. I'm like, oh man, let me run this out of me. So I run down to the other side of the beach. We start like, we make our way back again. And this time I'm walking back and I see your dad sitting down. There's like, everyone on the beach is like having a blast, like, surfing, boogie boarding. And then there's her dad in a chair, asleep, sitting up, but like leaned forward, wrapped up in a bed sheet. And it was like just one of those things that I was like, after that, I was like, I have to go put my face in the sand, dig myself a nose hole, put myself in the sand, and just not do anything for the next 2 hours until this passes. Oh my God. So it was like one of those experiences where, yeah, there are like certain cubensis mushrooms out there that just for whatever reason, higher psilocybin content, I imagine, but yeah, it's interesting. That was the only other strain besides penis envy I've tried that has hit like that before. So it was interesting.
It is. And I would also like to honor it's something that I call things that only happen on mushrooms. You know, like that would have never happened to you if you weren't on mushrooms. Like, why does the weirdest shit
100%.
come out of the woodwork when it's like that comedicness of the spirit of the medicine. It's just like, hey, you want to laugh at this? You're like, okay.
It's like, you know what I've really found is that like I have this hypothesis starting because you're so right. It happens with LSD especially too. I'll tell you a crazy story that happened to me on LSD. I think it's even worse in a way on LSD. Like LSD, the universe or God, whatever you want to call it, really fucks with you. But in a way that's like more like, how did that happen? Psilocybin, it's more like just really funny things. LSD, it's just a little bit different. So, you know, it's like with psilocybin, like I've had so many of these kind of things happen. And what I really think is, you know, and also with LSD too. And what I really think is that like, you know, if we look at kids being closest to God, source, whatever you want to call it, and kids being like innately full of joy, because that's our innate state as human beings, right? And then like, you know, they move through an emotion, they cry, whatever, they're right back to joy and they're back to it. What is the side effect of joy? Laughter, comedy, etc. Right? So I think the closer you get to God, the funnier everything gets, right? And so like if you look at the Dalai Lama, like these individuals that are supposed to be the closest to God, they're like big goofballs, you know? And like for me, I always know who I'm going to get along with how much they laugh, because like I think it's like this unconscious or maybe somewhat conscious sign that like we remember something that really cannot be put into words, because like they talk about the Tao or God or whatever, it's beyond words, but you remember something about life that it's all okay. It's all copacetic, if you will. And so like with LSD, I was at a music festival one year, halfway across the country, decided to eat gel tabs with a group of friends. And it was, again, like every LSD experience. Oh, that was a double dose. Whoops, I didn't realize. And so now I had to like play catch up for a lot of my friends that did not expect that kind of experience. So we eventually go back to camp. And so we're at this campground, 50,000 people at this music festival. We drove there. So our car was next to like our campsite. Guy walks by. Oh, you guys are from Massachusetts. Whereabouts? We start telling him where we live. He's like, dude, I live in the same town. I'm like, what? And then I'm like, well, what part of the town? Because like the town I lived in at the time was like a big town. He's like, oh, this part. I'm like, that is the part that I live in. And I'm like, oh, what street? And he's like, says my street. Now, so many things went off in my head at once. There was like am I dreaming? There was like he's following me. He knows, but what would he be following me for? Like there was like all these things happening. But in reality, it was just literally that somehow that happened. I was at a music festival, 50,000 people, met a guy that lived on my street back in Massachusetts. And then I ended up, after that, seeing him at every show I went to.
Oh my gosh.
Strange as shit. That just like only happens when you're interacting with psychedelics. So weird.
Totally. Yeah. And that is the perfect context for it. And I feel like that also relates to my professional life. Like when I came out of doing ayahuasca in the Amazon, the platform that I advertised my massage services on had dissolved while I was gone on this month-long trip. And I don't advertise anywhere else. And I was like, how am I going to get clients? I don't know. I'll figure it out when I get home. Well, as I got home, it was like, I had been off the grid for a week while we were in the Amazon. And I guess that's no longer the case. They got Starlink this week. So whatever.
Hamilton was telling me.
Whatever. But, so.
Cool name for internet though.
Seriously. But so I came out and I had like all these emails from like a place that I had been wooing to do breathwork at, finally was ready to have me in once a week. All these clients came out of the woodwork that found me on the same platform and bothered to like find my Instagram, to find my website, to track me, to book me. And all these clients just kept finding me who, when they met me, were like, oh, wait, you what? And this guy, for instance, had just kind of fallen off the bandwagon of being sober. And he was back here from Costa Rica, where he was doing a lot of plant medicines. And he's very involved in this community and knows a lot of the people. And he didn't really know anything about me, but he heard my voice on the phone and was like, yep, you. And I don't even answer the phone when it rings. So like, that's shame on me for missing clients that way. Cause I'm like, please text me. And I just happened to see this number. Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to miss all these clients if I don't start answering my phone. And to this day, he's like the only person I've ever answered the phone for. But when he got here, it was just like this crazy synchronicity from ayahuasca that like, I mean, he's soul fam now, you know, it helped him move through what he was going through. And it just was like, ayahuasca sent me a client. And that continues to happen. The more that I sit in the medicine, it's like, everyone's like, oh, what do you do? And I'm super authentic all the time. So I'm like, well, I'm your massage therapist and an energy healer and a psychedelic guide. And they're like, wait, psychedelic what? And so then usually the clients who find me are just already doing mushrooms or very interested in mushrooms. And it's like just this crazy mycelial network. And I love it so much.
It's so true. And I'm so glad you brought up the mycelium network, because there are so many times that dawns on me that, like, you know, we're the cells of the planet, right? Like all these interesting like metaphors and things like that, you know, and I think that's one of the things that cannabis has taught me specifically is like those kind of like what I call ideas. Those come mostly from me on cannabis. Like, you know, those more like contemplative, almost like co-communicative ideas. Whereas like psilocybin, mostly psilocybin is more like it just tells you stuff, kind of like almost claircognizance, knowings, like, oh my God. Whereas like cannabis will give you one thing and you're like, but that reminds me of this. And then you get an answer back and you can like have this like go on talk. And I've heard ayahuasca is similar to that, but it's interesting because I feel the same way with cannabis. It's like literally this plant has done so much for me throughout my life. And now like I get to teach other people about it. And it's just been so fascinating. I'm sure you've had similar experiences like you were just mentioning too, where like when you get into this work, there is a level of surrender that is like almost given to you. And I think that's been one of the hardest parts for me is like learning to just like over and over deepening levels of like letting go and trusting that like something has got my back, whether it just be cannabis, whether it be God, universe, source, whatever you want to call it. Something's got their back, you know? Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned not answering phone calls because I'm the same way. Like, guys, for anyone listening, you ever try to call me?
Don't do it.
Probably not going to answer. Like, because I'm just like, I don't know how, like, unless I really know you, like, if I know who it is, I'll answer. But if it's a random number, I'm like, I don't know how much time this is going to take. And I don't know if, like, that's going to stress me out and not having that time. So, yeah, it's like, I 100% agree. You know, it's like, my phone is basically just to text and send voice notes.
Yeah. I put that in my voicemail as well, where I was like, for a faster response, please text me. And so then I'm like, clients are serious.
Exactly.
If they
know
do.
Thyself. Yeah. Know thyself is important.
Yeah. I'm interested that you also had some really dark experiences on penis envy because that was my experience too. And so my distributor switched from golden teachers to penis envy. And I really don't have a lot of access to strains out here. And I'm working on that right now because now at this point in what I do with mushrooms, it seems ridiculous. Like I need to have 6 different strains on hand at all time. Yeah. But so I was starting to dive into penis envy and I didn't like it as a strain at all. I was like, I love the beautiful fractals and I don't get fractals on penis envy. I get like graphical images that spin out and I didn't like it. And so Hamilton was like, well, Barrett, you're a psilocybin facilitator and I don't like penis envy either. And so you need to figure it out. And he's like, you need to deep dive into penis envy and figure it out because we should all know the difference between the strains. And why don't you do that research? And I was like, fuck, God damn it, Hamilton. Okay. So like Hamilton said, do it. I'll fucking do it. And I'm actually really glad I did. That was in October, end of October. I think we had that discussion and now it's February. And since then I spent a lot of time working with penis envy and I had my first shamanic battle on it during an energy session with a client. And so I do mushroom body and energy work with clients as well. And this one client was like finally ready to release the darkness of his soul. And while we were as the medicine came on, I'm closing my eyes and dropping in to look for stuff. And I'm just like, it's so fucking dark in here. Like, I hate this. And so I was keeping my eyes open. And then I was like, maybe it's dark because like, and that had been a reoccurring thing for me on penis envy, that it was just kind of dark. But I also was like, maybe it's dark because I'm supposed to do something about it. I looked through what I was seeing in a way that Hamilton's taught me for navigation. And all of a sudden stumbled upon this being that was there with these beady eyes and little pointy ears and like a beak. And the rest of it was like black smoke that made him up and immediately had that. If you've ever heard Hamilton Cosmic Shaman battles, that immediate moment where you show up on the battlefield, it was like, I looked this thing in the eye, threw my client down. And then there we are on this like football field. And I'm like, fuck, this is exactly how Hamilton said it would be. And so I ended up having to lean into my first shamanic battle, and it was a war. There were like 4 or 5 battles in it that ultimately, had me questioning, how do I know when I've won? And ultimately I won when all of the shit that I hadn't been wanting to see, we transcended and landed on a planet amongst the cosmos, and everything turned really beautiful. And and that in particular made me start rethinking penis envy, and that perhaps I was doing it wrong. And I've started getting really intentional with my penis envy. And I noticed the higher frequency of a vibration you can bring to it when you take it is kind of will color how the experience that you have. And it's also very programmable. So I can, put my hands over it and call upon the spirit of the mushroom and put my intents into it. And that's really important for utilizing it, because otherwise you just kind of have these I was having these experiences. But now that, there's a deep intention, and I found out that once you start taking about 4 grams of it at a time, it just simulates ayahuasca. And so I was like, oh, wow. I get it now. It's DMT heavy. That's why it doesn't look like all these other mushroom journeys, because this is DMT. And, psilocybin turns into psilocin in your stomach. And the difference between DMT and psilocin is just like one little molecular difference. They're like brother and sister that go skipping through the forest together. So that was my deep dive into penis envy, thanks to Hamilton. And I get it now. I get it.
Wow. That's incredible. When you were talking about psilocin and DMT, it kind of reminded me of this like dichotomy between like hemp and cannabis. Obviously, it's much less subtle than that, but much less subtle. But like the idea that, like, for instance, like I always, when I'm breaking down the differences, I tell people hemp is going to be psychoactive. Cannabis, aka the same thing but just higher THC than 0.3%, is going to be more intoxicating. So like it's kind of like that same kind of dichotomy between like, psilocin, definitely, I mean, both are going to be intoxicating to a certain degree, or enhancing, however you want to describe it. But that is what I've experienced with penis envy. And my best guess, and I haven't done like a whole lot of research with them, but like my best guess was that, maybe this is like me meeting 100% my shadow. And maybe this is like meant for like a darker experience where I actually look into those crevices that haven't seen light in a long time. And so it's very fascinating you can bring that up, because that's like exactly what happened when I had that really challenging experience. Was still to this day, after I broke through that challenge, it was the most incredible psilocybin experience I've ever had. But it was also the most challenging on the other side. And it's kind of like the idea that if you prioritize pleasure, you're going to have a lot of pain in your life. And if you prioritize pain, the response from that is pleasure, right? So like, it's the idea of this whole like post-traumatic growth thing, right? Where like, for instance, why do people do an ice bath? Not because they fucking enjoy the ice, right? They might enjoy the process because they know how good it feels after. Same with exercise, same with anything that's more of this delayed gratification thing. And so, I would think that like most mushrooms in some way, shape, or form are going to be that for most people, because they're going to be a little nervous anyway. But penis envy, I mean, it's like walking into the gauntlet, as I've found. So it's funny you bring that up, and 100% I agree.
Yeah. And I was concerned, because as I'm serving mushrooms, I'm like, is it irresponsible of me to give these to people? Like I really spent like a month being like, I think I'm being irresponsible. And, had enough people be like, it's mushrooms. Like, you never know what you're going to, like, as someone who's not as advanced as you never know what you're going to get. And I talked to enough other people who were like, that's my favorite strain. And I was like, how? Like, Hamilton's got a story of having seizures for 5 hours on penis envy on the bathroom floor. Like, I just like, I wasn't enjoying it. But now that I took this deep dive, I call it my penis envy chapter. I really enjoy them as well, but I also enjoy them much more at like the 4 gram and the 5 gram dose, which I wouldn't recommend anyone jump straight into.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart, for sure, or faint of soul, I guess would be kind of like the better way to say it, but I think it's so beneficial, again, like this is like, psychedelics taught me at an earlier age, around 23, that there was beauty in challenge. There was beauty in pain. There was information and lessons and wisdom and knowledge within pain. And yeah, sure, you could definitely gain that from pleasure as well. But what I found is that like most of my lessons that have really helped me a lot have come from some type of challenge, And so like, I think the great thing about psychedelics is that I think for most people that take them, like in some way, shape or form, you are leaving your normal lease on reality in place of something different, aka the unknown. And I think for a lot of people, even even people that are microdosing, of course, like for people like you and I and people that are listening to the show, I imagine for microdosing, there's not much fear that goes into it. But, I realized that when talking to people like my mother that have never interacted with psychedelics, even a microdose, even understanding like and trusting like my explanation of it and everything, there's a fear there. And I think it's a, what's the right way to say it? I think there's like some type of maybe ego or, default mode network, some type of part of you is aware of what the possibility of that is. And I think that's, where a lot of people have challenges in psychedelics just overall is like with that part of them, realizing like, oh shit, there's actual real utility here. And I might actually not be back the way that I was here before, aka ego death. But I think that like, for me, the more that I've been able to actually realize that like, no, these experiences, yes, they're going to be challenging, but I remember to come back to my breath. I'm in a safe container. Like I've done this enough where I know that I'm not going to die. So what is the real fear, right? Simulated death. I'm like, I can handle that, and at the end of the day, I've had the experience that even when I die from this physical shell, I don't really die. It's just another chapter beginning. And so that's helped me a lot for sure. And I can't even imagine the experiences you've been having with Hamilton. So I am super stoked to hear more about that and also to see him in person, to have some of these myself.
Oh my gosh. I hope you join us in June. Don't go in May, go in June.
Yes, I'm definitely going to tell Rachel about that. And, Barrett, this has been absolutely amazing. I cannot wait to have you back on for round 2. I feel like we only scratched the surface. And it's funny because the listeners will know, like I named this podcast This One Time on Psychedelics to illustrate the stories that people have around psychedelics. And a lot of times, like a lot of the guests I have on, we talk a lot more about like, the psychology, the science, things like that. But what I've loved about this episode, among many other things, is that like it's been a real deep, real world experience and stories surrounding this. And I think that like this has been great because I haven't had one of these types of episodes in a long time, and I enjoy them so much. And I can imagine we're only scratching the surface of the immense amount of stories you have to tell us.
Plenty more.
Oh, I am so grateful. And tell the people where they can find you, where they can find out information about you, how they can maybe find out more about your services, your podcast. Tell them where they can go to find all of that.
Yeah. So the best way to find all of that information in one place is my website, barrettperlman.com, BARRETTPERLMAN.com. In the coming month, I'll be launching the Sacred Integration Tribe. And so I invite you all to come and join me there for weekly live chats on integration, talking about your experiences, how you can best utilize those to gain from them moving forwards, as well as a community for you to connect with other like-minded individuals and share in your experiences. I'm also available for psychedelic coaching containers, massage and energy work, and host the Modern Hippie Podcast, which is available everywhere podcasts are. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Just search the Modern Hippie Podcast. And I usually hang out on Instagram at Barrett Perlman. So you can find me there as well.
Awesome. And guys, that'll all be in the show notes too. But Barrett, I have one question that I like to ask everyone before they get out of here. And so that question is this. So let's say that someone listens to this conversation and they're super excited to look into psychedelics for their own life or in their own life. What would the one piece of advice be for people to allow them to use the proper discernment in choosing whether or not psychedelics are right for them at this time in their lives?
Take a deep breath in to your belly and sigh it out through your mouth, and check in with your intuition about which psychedelic calls to you, because you will always receive a call from one of them. And a call can look like it seems to keep popping up in the news clips or on your Alexa enabled device, or for some reason, Instagram is flooding you with things about psilocybin. And in that way, sort of discern which medicine, and based on if you have been receiving a lot of signals, perhaps it is the right time, but check in with your intuition and your internal knowing and your gut and trust that. Because every single physical body on this planet is different. And so what works for someone else might not work for you, and what works for you might not work for someone else. So you are the expert on you, and trust that.
Oh, I love that. Alrighty, guys. When I first got connected to Barrett through our mutual friend and past podcast guest, Leah Drew, like I mentioned in the beginning, I immediately had a synchronicity and that we are both close to Hamilton Southern, like I mentioned also. And the fact that Barrett was training with Hamilton told me a lot about how dedicated she was to her work before I had even met her. For any of you listening who are looking to enter Barrett's world and benefit from the incredible offerings and community she has put together, make sure to check out the show notes for this episode, where I will be laying out all of the best ways to get in touch with her today. Barrett, thank you so much for the dedication, commitment, and passion you put into all of the work you do, for being a source of inspiration for countless individuals in the psychedelic space and beyond today, and for sharing your time, energy, and experience with the listeners and me on the show today. And until next time, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.